Hello, it is the month of June in the year 217 BC. The Second Punic War between Carthage against Rome had started only a year ago. And in this month of June 217 BC, a Carthaginian invading army was already in Roman territory and gave Rome her second major defeat of this war at the Battle of Lake Trasimene. There, a second Roman army was lost. The situation for Rome was delicate, but as a clear testimony of her resolution to keep on fighting, nobody in the Senate proposed peace talks with the invader. Instead, at that moment, the Senate elected a dictator. For the next 6 months, that dictator will have absolute control of all Roman armed forces. That decision was highly unusual and underscores how delicate was the situation. The man chosen for that task was Consul Quintus Fabius Maximus, an intelligent individual with great military experience who soon left Rome at the head of a new army of 50,000 men. Meanwhile, the invading Carthaginian army, under the command of Hannibal Barca, continued to advance through central Italy, ravaging the countryside, until that invading army reached the province of Apulia, the northernmost of the former territories of Magna Graecia. And the importance of the arrival of the invaders to that region is that they had arrived to a territory with a lot of former Greek colonists who only 2 generations ago had been absorbed by force by the Roman Republic. And by force, now those individuals were part of the Roman Confederation. And that brings us to Hannibal's strategy. With the presence of his army in the Italian peninsula, Hannibal hoped to provoke mass uprisings among those people who had been recently subjugated by the Roman Republic. In northern Italy, he had first arrived to Cisalpine Gaul, where only a generation early those battle-hardened Gauls had been subjugated by the Romans. And to the south, now he had arrived to the former colonies of Magna Graecia, and by rallying those people to his cause, Hannibal hoped to destroy Rome. So, now that he was at Apulia, Hannibal began the job of sending emissaries to recruit allies in the region. But at the same time, the dictator Fabius arrived with his army of 50,000 men. And as a first step, that Roman commander established a camp for his troops. Now, Hannibal had a new Roman army close by, and he prepared his men for a new blown-out battle. But this time, the Carthaginian general suffered a bitter disappointment. Before his arrival to the area, the Roman dictator analyzed the situation. And with the reports he knew that, since the start of the war, Hannibal had surprised Rome 4 times. The first surprise happened in mid-October of the year 218 BC. On that month, Hannibal started to cross the Alps, and his advance during the winter season led to frightful losses for his army. Thus, in November, he arrived to the valley of the River Po with just 26,000 men. But regardless of the huge losses suffered, Hannibal had won the strategic initiative. So, an invading army had arrived to Roman territory. Then, in the month of December, the 26,000 invaders, who had been reinforced by 12,000 Gallic warriors who once again rose in arms against Rome, They fought against a Roman army of 44,000 legionnaires at the Battle of the River Trevia. And the second surprise for Rome was that her army was defeated. After that victory, the Carthaginian army remained in the Po Valley, gathering men and supplies. And thanks to his victory, Hannibal recruited more local warriors until he had 50,000 men. And then he prepared to march south towards Magna Graecia. But on his way now, there were two new Roman armies. One, 66,000 men strong in a central position, and another of 40,000 to the east. That was the situation. But then we have the third surprise for Rome. In the month of May, 217 BC, Hannibal marched to the west and crossed the northern Apennines and entered the marshland of the river Arnus. Travel conditions were harsh and there were casualties. Hannibal lost his right eye, but he outflanked the Romans and now moved south through Roman territory, and on his path he left a wide trail of death and destruction. Soon enough, the bulk of the Roman central army, some 40,000 men, set out after the Carthaginian force. But on June 20th, 217 BC, that Roman army was ambushed at Lake Trasimene and destroyed. Those were the four great surprises that Rome had suffered in less than a year. And precisely, the Roman dictator analyzed those situations. Without a doubt, Hannibal was no rookie. Instead, that enemy of Rome was an extremely dangerous general who had to be subdued with a lot of skill. And from the moment Fabius arrived to the zone, he only fought small skirmishes. That way, he sought to sap the strength of the Carthaginian army little by little. Fabius had decided to fight a long war of attrition. And at that precise moment, it was the right choice. Because when Hannibal arrived to the former colonies of Magna Graecia, no city in that region joined him. And with each skirmish, Hannibal lost some troops and had no possibilities of replacing them. While Fabius, with all the strategic resources of the Roman Republic and the Roman Confederation behind him, could replace his losses easily. And he will follow that strategy until the invading army was on the verge of collapse. And only then he will strike a massive final blow. So soon, the Roman dictator found himself wearing down the Carthaginian army. On the other hand, Hannibal knew that he could not afford to keep fighting like that. And once again, he showed his skill. With a bold maneuver, he marched back to central Italy, arrived to the province of Campania, and devastated the countryside, hoping to provoke the Romans to fight another battle. Fabius and his army soon arrived to the scene and reestablished contact. But once again, the dictator kept a safe distance and just kept skirmishing. The Carthaginian plan to provoke a battle had failed. So, with the countryside around him devastated, Hannibal returned to northern Apulia, where he established his winter camp. And Fabius once again followed him, reestablished contact, and kept his distance. A sober analysis of the general situation shows that, at that moment, Hannibal's strategy was a failure. He was not finding enough allies. In Cisalpine Gaul, he managed to rally a handful of tribes to his cause. But in the former Magna Graecia, no one had joined him. But in Rome, They were getting increasingly frustrated with Fabius' strategy. For an entire year after Fabius had become dictator, the invading army had been attacking and devastating territories of Rome and her closest allies. And that brings us to a very important point. Since the beginning of her history, Rome has distinguished herself as a state capable of defeating her enemies. An offensive stance and aggressiveness were seen as her virtues. But now Fabius was just skirmishing with the enemy. And from the point of view of the general public and of the Senate, that strategy was a mistake. So, in December 217 BC, when his dictatorship ended, Fabius was removed from command, and then the Senate elected two consuls, Gaius Terentius Varro and Aemilius Paulus, to finish off the invader once and for all. And for that purpose, they gave this duo a huge army. And we all know what happened next. Under the command of those two consuls, on August 2nd, 216 BC, their army of 88,000 Roman and allied legionnaires attacked the 50,000 warriors of Hannibal. And the Roman army was thoroughly defeated at the Battle of Cannae. At that moment, some of Hannibal's lieutenants urged him to attack the city of Rome itself. But Hannibal knew that the defenses of that city were too strong. It just wasn't an option. So he remained in Apulia. And it finally happened. Cities on this territory began to join him. And by 212 BC, 40% of southern Italy had taken arms against Rome. And that's not all. In the year 215 BC, Macedon declared war on Rome. Hannibal's position had greatly improved. But it was just a mirage. Because by the year 212 BC, Rome had already placed into war footing 25 Roman legions and 25 allied legions, for a total of just over 200,000 men, deployed in numerous garrisons and field armies all over the front. Furthermore, Rome reached alliances with Greek city-states that helped her to neutralize Macedon. Once again, Hannibal needed another victory, but that new victory never materialized. The Roman Senate recognized that their generals were not up to the task of fighting against Hannibal. Thus, in 216 BC, after the debacle at Cannae, the Senate explicitly prohibited facing Hannibal in a battlefield. Now, he was only to be harassed. The Fabius strategy had been officially implemented. But at the same time, Roman armies marched against those territories that had risen against her, where Hannibal was not found, and attacked them. And when Hannibal arrived to the rescue of those areas, those Roman armies simply retreated to entrenched camps. And that is how the men who took arms against Rome in the south and the north gradually began suffering a long series of setbacks. But that's not all. At the start of the war, Rome had carried out a triple strategy. In the same year of the start of the war, 218 BC, on the north they had deployed an army of 20,000 men to defend Cisalpine Gaul. Another army deployed on central Italy of 24,000 men was sent to Iberia to establish a Roman presence in that peninsula, and soon that army placed a great pressure over the lucrative Carthaginian colonies. And in 217 BC, a third army that had been gathered in Sicily with 26,000 men was sent against the city of Carthage. That army was defeated and had to return to Sicily. And with the serious situation for the Roman metropole, that ensued on the following years, the idea of an attack against Carthage itself was abandoned. But with their initial success in Iberia, from 217 BC, Roman reinforcements were sent to that peninsula and the fighting continued. And the interesting thing is that during all that time, Hannibal kept requesting for reinforcements. But the Carthaginian Senate instead sent whatever resources it could muster to the fight in Iberia. The strategy of attacking those Carthaginian colonies had been brilliant. And after the Battle of Cannae, when the Romans returned to the Fabian strategy, more reinforcements were sent to that campaign. And little by little, the Romans found themselves in an increasingly favorable situation. True, the fighting in Iberia took years, and the Romans experienced setbacks. For instance, in 211 BC, a Roman army was defeated at the Battle of the River Baetis. But the Roman advance continued, and in 207 BC, the Carthaginians were defeated at the Battle of Ilipa. That was the coup de grace, and after several more years of fighting, the Carthaginians finally abandoned Iberia. The Carthaginian Empire was losing the war, and its best general was still bottled up in southern Italy. And while Hannibal was still in southern Italy, in June or July of 200 BC, a 30,000 strong Roman army landed in Africa. For the second time, after 14 years since the start of the war, the Romans had arrived to the Carthaginian metropolis. A Carthaginian army rushed to fight the Romans in the early days of 203 BC, but that army was defeated at the Battle of Campi Magni. After that battle, the imperial territory was brutally sacked. The situation was dire, and Carthage ordered every last detachment back to the metropolis, including Hannibal's, who for 13 years had found himself in southern Italy, gradually losing ground, and thus, when he received the order to return, he complied without objections. And upon his return, he took command of the defense force, and in the year 202 BC, the Battle of Zama was fought. In that battle, Hannibal came very close to winning, but in the end, he was defeated. And with that defeat, the Second Punic War was over. Well, the way to fight against Hannibal is a clear example on how to deal against a powerful commander who has limited resources. And it reminds me of how the campaign in the year 1813 in Germany was fought against Napoleon. For several months, the Allied generals of the Sixth Coalition only sought to fight detachments of the French army where Napoleon was not present, thus gradually weakening the French forces, until they finally defeated the French emperor at the massive Battle of Leipzig. In the same way that the strategy of attrition had worked against Hannibal. I hope that you liked this video, and if you liked it, you can always support me a lot by becoming a Patreon to my channel, and the link is found down below. Regards, Victor Aguilar-Chang.